Welcome to another episode of Purple Ponderings with Pankaj. And today we have with us Russ from Church Mutual. Guy, a pleasure to have you with us on this episode.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Guy, for the people that may not have heard about you, because you're really low profile as I've seen, and known you for a while, could you take a few minutes and just talk a little bit about your role? What is it that you do at Church Mutual, so that our listeners know?
Absolutely. Yeah, maybe just Church Mutual itself, we're the largest insurer of religious institutions in the country. We're not limited to houses of worship, though. We also write senior living facilities, camps, nonprofit and human services type organizations, and all types of education facilities, public, private, parochial, charter, etc. So I serve as the Assistant Vice President of Risk Control, and I also wear maybe another hat that's a little odd combination, but also the head of our innovation program here at Church Mutual.
Excellent. So I'm gonna, launch right into it and just start with just an open-ended question around, Guy, you've been, with working in the IoT and experimenting with it. Actually, more than experimenting it, you've seen real results. But can you just share at a broad level your perspective on IoT as it's evolved and where it stands today from your standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. Church Mutual has been really heavy into using IoT to help prevent and mitigate losses with our policyholders. Going all the way back to 2014 is when we started experimenting with it, and then really took a production view of it in 2016. And since then, we've put sensors in more than 7,000 policyholder locations. These are water and temperature devices, and we are seeing wonderful results from those in terms of actually preventing losses, both from a frozen pipes perspective as well as water leaks, and keeping water leaks down to keeping those damages much lower than they would be if we weren't using those devices. What's really interesting in our space, especially when you think about houses of worship, they're only occupied a couple of days a week, many of them. Some of them are open all week long, but the majority really are only having services once or twice a week, and the facilities might be absolutely empty the rest of the time. So if a water leak starts on Monday, they might not find it until Saturday evening if they come in as they're preparing for the next day's services. So that's a situation where using an IoT device, something that collects data that then you can use to inform individuals of something that's going on, is a very nice fit. At least we found it to be. And it's really, though, that aspect of not just having the device there, but actually using the data that's coming off of it to try to influence behavior. And in this case, help people see something that's going on so they can react to it. Or hopefully, on the free side, help them understand where temperatures are falling and pipes are getting colder, and have them do something before there's an event that occurs. And those are things like, maybe the furnace has stopped working. And again, they wouldn't know it maybe for several days if we didn't have a device in there that's collecting that data and then giving it to us to be able to inform them that something's not right.
Excellent. As you've described this journey and how you progressed with it, I'm sure there would have been some challenges, right, that you would have faced, and maybe you continue to face, right? So could you talk a little bit about what were the challenges that you faced that you were able to overcome, and then maybe some of the things that you may still continue to, wish to, from an improvement standpoint? So just to get that perspective on both sides of the coin.
Yeah, as you and the listeners can imagine, there's a cycle that happens whenever you're trying to do something with new technology, where the initial challenges are really about the technology and getting the technology to do the thing that you want it to do. In our case, when we started experimenting with sensors, really wireless capabilities in the sensors themselves was just taking off. And so the initial sensors we put out, we actually had to run Ethernet cable from the sensor to the gateway. Now, of course, those are all wireless radio frequency inside the building, so we don't have to do things like that. But those are some of those early challenges. now as the technology has matured and gets a little bit easier to use and more effective, the biggest challenge we have is actually the behavior of getting these things installed or placed in the facilities. So we don't charge our policyholders anything outside of their policy premium. These kits are included as part of their policy. So we ship them right to their door with the idea that they'll actually do the placement of them in their facility. We're trying to get away from the word install now because we're seeing that using that word seems to be a behavioral trigger that has people put this off because they think it's going to be something very, very involved. So those are not only challenges, but things we're learning along the way is how to really influence the behavior so that the device can become active and actually start producing that data so we can give them the value add of the information knowledge about what's going on in their facility.
Got it. That's a very interesting point, right? So it's all about the, the user behavior, right? And how do they respond to the same message? I mean, I guess what you're talking about is that you may use a word and you may think and interpret that word in a certain way, but to somebody else that might mean more work and whatever, like trigger some other behavior, right? And changing that is what has helped you. That's
Right.
super excellent.
Yeah, and on top of
In
that, once we get sort of beyond the perceptions of things, the other challenge that's really looming out there is while it may make a lot of sense to us as an insurance carrier to limit these losses, it doesn't necessarily mean anything to their mission or their ministry in these organizations, right? So there's also sort of this larger hurdle that is emerging or that's becoming more evident to us that even when we try to convince policyholders that they can save on their deductible and this helps them to avoid the disruption in their ministries, it's still too far away from their actual mission in terms of their mindset and how they view it. So that's still a hurdle that we need to overcome. We've got some things that we're working on to maybe cross that hurdle pretty significantly, but we won't know until we do a little bit more experimentation with those.
Got it. One question I wanted to ask you is that the adoption of this technology in the industry in general is still very limited, right? So we've seen not a whole lot of people jump into it. What do you think is if I could ask you to, using your own experience and I'm sure you're connected and chat with some of your industry brethren, what do you hear as challenges that have, sort of slowed the adoption of this technology?
Yeah, it really seems to be that chasm of going from something you're not doing at all today to believing in something new and how it's going, with what result you're going to get from it. And if people haven't had any experience yet with these devices or what they can actually do in terms of behavior change, it becomes difficult mentally to cross that chasm in any significant way, right? As I talk with people in the industry, it seems like the majority of people are now doing some very small experiments in using these devices, but they're very small because the decision makers are looking for a proof point that these are going to do something. I think the difficulty with that sort of experimentation in this case is the small experiment doesn't allow you to extrapolate far enough in terms of what it can mean. We were very lucky, I guess, that our leaders at the time had faith in this. They saw this as something that conceptually just made sense to them, and they released the resources and made people available to do this very early on to get some pretty large experiments through that then proved the point. Hopefully, as people are listening to this and learning more about these in companies that are having good results with it, like us, that'll maybe help move past that hurdle a bit so that even more policyholders can take advantage of these types of things. Because there aren't a lot of policyholders, I think, that'll do it themselves, whether we're talking about our type of special area markets or whether we're talking about homeowners, unless they get a nudge from their insurers. I think it won't become widespread without that.
Got it, got it. So, what do you think is the one thing that if you had the superpowers to, to sort of eliminate, right, as a constraint, um, sounds like more on the insurer side. What would that be? What would you say would that be?
That is a really good question, Pankaj. I think it's there has to be the belief, right? And that's what really frees up the resources. And if we can be a data point for folks, we'd love to do that. But I think there's others as well that are starting to go in a big way in this space, right? Hippo and EOS and those kinds of companies really sort of getting their business all focused on this. So I think to wave the magic wand, it would be that we can get everybody across the belief chasm much faster than what we currently are as an industry.
Excellent, excellent. And I guess to help with that belief, one of the things that I've seen, and I like your perspective, is really finding those true internal champions, right? Because someone inside has to, because it sounds like what you did was you were that sort of champion, and you had the ears of the leadership, right, to buy into and let you sort of try this out and give it enough time, right, and belief. Would you say that that's that is a gap which is which needs to be plugged in as well, right? Finding the true internal champion, and how do we go about finding this champion?
Another good series of questions, and really I have to give credit to our current CEO, who was in a different role at the time, but Rich Poirier. Really, he became frustrated enough with the losses we were seeing from freezing temperatures and the differences in the polar vortex things that are happening these days, and really started back in 2014 and then reoccurred in 16 and now are actually more of a regular pattern. His frustration with those losses, coupled with some personal experiences he had with some sensors that were working in his own in a property that he purchased, he put it together in his mind and he said, "Why can't we do this?" Right? And I think that's one of those that's getting across that chasm of belief, right? Not so much will this work, but why can't we use these to do this? And then him coming to us as a team and saying, prove to me why this won't work versus can it work, and that was his push on that. So I think you're absolutely right. It starts with leadership having that vision to see an application that might not be there yet today, but to challenge the team to say, conceptually this seems like this should work, why wouldn't it? And then challenge the teams to really innovate toward making those things work.
Excellent, excellent. That's a great tip, and I guess it's almost like a blueprint for someone to to try this out, right? So I think this is, in my own experience, the starting point, right? Having the vision of how to think about this, and then giving it the care and love and attention, so that once you get down the path, you kind of continue to push it. So that's great. Excellent. Questions for you on, in this, I mentioned about our podcast, right? The idea is to get more and more people to share their stories and what they've tried, what they've not tried. If you were listening to a future episode of Purple Ponderings, is there someone that you'd like to hear from, that we could try to get in front of?
Well, there's lots of folks, right? Of course, there's some of the big names like Elon Musk, right? He would be a great person to hear from, although he's spread himself across lots of media already. But I'm not sure I can point to particular individuals, but certainly in companies, American Family is a very interesting company in terms of what they've done on their venture side, as well as their internal innovation and development teams. I mentioned Hippo and Neos, and both of those companies, very big on the IoT space, and hearing about what they're experiencing, right? Whether they're seeing success or whether they're hitting some of these behavioral hurdles would be very interesting to me as well.
Yeah. And just so you know, one of the earlier episodes that we had, actually, we did record a podcast with Aviad, who's the chief product officer at Hippo. So, just so you know, that's also something that's already out there. One of the earliest people that we had talked to, and it's very interesting. You mentioned Hippo because they do IoT. They have IoT in front and center of their strategy, but they are thinking about this whole home insurance very differently, right? I've not heard
Hmm.
that perspective, and so I think it's some of the names that you mentioned. Those are absolutely great ones, even in our research. So we've gotten that those people interviewed, and we'll continue to do that, right? My like I said, I'm very fascinated by how people think about IoT, and every time I talk to someone, it's always a different angle. So it's a good learning perspective. So with that, Guy, I'm going to move towards the last part of our segment, where I would want our listeners to know a little bit more about you. So why don't we start with you telling us something which we would not read about either on your LinkedIn profile or Facebook profile, um, anything that the readers that you want them to know.
Sure, yeah. I don't know if I would call this claim to fame, but I did an internship in Washington, D.C. between my junior and senior years in college, and it happened to be the same summer that Monica Lewinsky was in Washington, D.C. So I did not meet her. I had nothing to do in the White House with anything going on there, but I was in the city at the same time as Monica Lewinsky.
Got it. Well, that is a very odd coincidence, and you know what? We'll stop there. But that is
Right.
something that you couldn't have put it together. So, next question is, just personally, for your own sort of knowledge and interest, what publications? I mean, who do you read? What do you read? Who do you follow? Any insights on that?
Yeah, I try to read very widely with lots of different topics in mind to try to bring a lot of different concepts together. I think one of the things, especially on the innovation side, is really having as many different perspectives as you can to think about as many things um, that are happening as you can. So, of course, I do a lot of the industry publications around insurance and being an insurance carrier, but I also watch things outside of insurance. So general financial services products, especially things that are going for consumers, just to see what's going on in that space. I love reading books about different ways to measure things to make sure that you're actually headed towards the results that you want to head toward. And then also books about mental models and the ways that we think about things. One of the ones that I think is just a really good book is Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman. Just a wonderful collection of different mental models and frameworks that can help us, potentially get past some of these behavioral barriers that at least we're experiencing as we experiment with new technology that may mean a lot of things to us as an insurance company, but not necessarily inside the mission of an organization that we're supporting. And how do we work with the mindsets to actually get the behaviors to align between the two of us?
Wow, that sounds like a must read. And you know what? I'll request you to just text me the name of that book. What we'll do is we'll
Yes.
link it up as well. That would be a good thing for our listeners to also probably try to read. Excellent. So with that, I'm going to ask you in this very last question, literally in our podcast. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take two names, right? And you have to select one of them and tell us why you selected that,
Sure.
right? So when it comes to sports, baseball or football,
Baseball.
and why?
Absolutely. I am not a big sports fan or athletics. My personal activity is mostly weight training down in my basement versus a team sport. But I did play baseball when I was younger. I was in Little League. And at that time, just the way things were, I was one of the two kids that could hit the ball out of the park. Of course, it was very small, right, in Little League type of fast. But I enjoyed that very much. And it's the All-American pastime, right?
Excellent, excellent, super. Superman or Spider-Man?
Superman, yeah, I enjoy them both, but Superman, another one of those all-American heroes, not afraid to show his face when he's in hero mode, and he's got everything, right? The strength, the X-ray vision, all of that.
Excellent. And then golf or tennis?
Oh, that's a hard one. I'll go with golf. I like the idea of I'm not good at it in any way, shape, or form, but being out in nature and walking around, even though we're chasing a little white ball, still an enjoyable thing for me.
Excellent. Paper books or ebooks?
I'm still a paper guy. So as much as I love innovation and technology, for me, there's something about holding that physical thing in your hand, flipping those pages. I tend to be a person that likes to be able to visually see my accomplishments. So turning a page, every page you turn, every chapter you turn, and when you actually finish that book and can put it on the shelf and know that that's something that you accomplished, that's paper books for me.
Got it. And then finally, Iceland or Hawaii as a vacation spot?
Oh, this one's tough. I have not been to either one, and I have a daughter actually that did a report on Iceland, and so she's constantly telling us to go to Iceland. However, Hawaii looks like another place with all kinds of natural wonders. Wow, I think I'm going to have to go with Hawaii first.
Got it. Got it. Excellent. Super. So with that, we come to an end to this episode of Purple Ponderings. Kai, any final words from your side?
Just thank you so much. Again, we'd love to be a resource for anybody that is looking for some data points on how IoT can help out their business. We'd be happy to share our experiences. And thank you for the opportunity here, Pankaj.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kai.